How is again? We're going to have some marathon uploads today. We just spoke about the werewolf on the other video. Now we're going to talk about the Banshee. Again, the reason why I bring the Banshee up is it's in the news. There was reporting of a Banshee sighting in County Clare, uh, in the south of Ireland, southwest of Ireland. Now, the Banshee is a very, very interesting thing. Now, the term the Banshee or the Banshee means literally of the white fairy or the woman fairy, depending on what the translation was. For instance, ban is the female, means basically female in Irish, and bon means white. That's what milk is called bonya. So bon, so it's the what's either it could really be said the white woman fairy, and she Sidhe is the where the she part comes from, the S she. So it's spelled Sidhe, but it's pronounced the she. So Banshee, the white fairy woman. Now, she is seen traditionally in Ireland as a portent of doom, a grim reaper type of figure. We have to be careful here. We could be dealing with Christian prejudice against all fairies. But having said that, Irish people, even the ones who were not religious, were quite afraid of fairies. That fairies were not like what Americans or people think Tinkerbell is, and around the world, fairies were literally synonymous with demons in this part of the world, and in Scotland, and in even in England and Wales, the Isle of Man, Cornwall. Now, my grandmother was a countrywoman from the bogs of Ireland, from around Tullamore, and she used to terrify me as us as kids. No, not deliberately, because we used to ask her to tell her ghost stories from her growing up, and she used to tell us about the Banshee, and she'd say that she'd be outside when somebody was going to die. She was outside their house, combing her long white hair and wailing, ah, ah. And this was to signify that a death was going to happen in the house soon. The Banshee was very commonly reported. People said it was probably wolves, foxes wailing at night, but the fox sound doesn't sound really like that. And people in the country were not stupid; they would have known what a fox sounded like. And there was another myth that if you're walking around the countryside and you found an old wooden comb, do not pick it up because that belonged to the Banshee, and the Banshee would then follow you home in the form of a curse. And then that led to this other aspect or element of the the archetype or the folklore story, is that the Banshee travelled with certain families. Now that automatically makes you think of something like a curse, that the Banshee is like a family curse. We know that curses travel in the family line, and if a family is cursed, then the Banshee is probably a element of that. Could be related to one of their ancestors dug up or dug up a an ancient megalithic site in in Ireland, particularly the mounds and the fairy forts, the rats, the circular enclosures, are connected with the She, the fairies who were the Tua de Danann, who after the defeat by the Milesian Gaels went into the underworld and became the She, living in the mounds and the hills and the passage tombs and passage installations and circular forts and so on. And this is why to this day, even the most modern people in Ireland will not cut down a fairy tree. Not at all. Or move into an estate where they heard there was a new housing development, where they heard there was a fairy tree or a fairy mound on it that was not dug over. They won't move in there. In fact, in I think it was Killinarden and Tala, back in the early 80s when Kildarn Heights, back in Tala in West Dublin in the early 80s when I was living there for a short time, there was a new council housing estate terrace houses built on the side of the mountain, and there was all kinds of paranormal activity, and it was put down to the fact that Tala, even mentioned by H.P. Lovecraft, amazingly, was the place where all the plague victims were buried from the Black Death, and Tala literally means, he called it Talacht, literally means the city of the dead or the land of the dead, and that was put down to that to it was a place of the Black Death victims. But if you looked at the older maps of Killinarden Heights, there was a megalith of some kind, like a fairy fort or something, in ruins before the housing development was built. And at the time, people in the housing development said they could hear the Banshee in the fields, because right behind the houses was at that time. I don't know what it's like now. That whole place is built up and very urbanized now, but behind the fields, that literally went right into the mountains, they were hearing the Banshee. Now, again, so there's two types of cursey thing there. One, that it's the families it's traveling with, one of their ancestors may have desecrated or caused an offense to the she, and she becomes a kind of a intergenerational reminder of their curse to show them that they're doomed. Now, the Banshee could also be something else completely different. For all we know, she could be a portent of warning. Rather than dare to tell you that you're going to die, it's there to tell you, be careful. Be careful. So it could be something like Mothman. And it could be, you know, it could be that it could be that a friend of mine in America who was involved in the Mothman thing wrote a book about the Banshee in the United States, and it's in that part of West Virginia, Ohio Valley, and her name is Susan, and Susan, uh, she is probably right that Mothman may be the Banshee transferred to the Ohio Valley, and when Mothman appeared before the collapse of the Silver Bridge, the it was performing the same function in the Ohio Valley, but transformed and transmuted as a result of the archetypal psychic weather of that community, which would be more impacted by things like Native Americans, Appalachian folklore, who were originally Irish and Scots-Irish, Ulster people, basically, and a transferred over. What I said in the werewolf video, the echo, right? The echo from the subconscious. And uh, the Banshee could be helping a family. It could be wired into the family to protect them. During World War One in particular, and the period of the Irish War of Independence, so you're talking from 1914 to 1922, there was endless stories of the Banshee or the Banshee all over the country, warning people that their sons were going to be killed or their family was going to be massacred or something like this. So that to me would suggest, rather than a curse, it suggests an element of protection, or at least a warning. Like the Mothman gives a warning when this before the Silver Bridge went down, and then that should make us reevaluate our entire. 'Cause debt is a very easy way to control people, and the church may well have re-engineered or reclassified the Banshee to be an evil spirit of debt, when it could be the reality. And it's very easy to control a person who's afraid of death or lives in a part of a situation or historical period or a rural vulnerable environment where death is very much closer to us than it would be to people in the 21st century living the way we do. Things like starvation or disease was much more, deadly and stuff like this. So maybe the Banshee, we've been sold a number on the Banshee, And maybe the fairy is on her side, and you're not going to believe this. A white cat has just walked, I don't know, has just walked by in front of me. So there you go, maybe there's something to it. So this is one of the things, if you read my book, The Druid Code, and if you haven't, I suggest you do because you'd really like it. The Druid Code makes the point of that you cannot take these things literally and directly, or you cannot take them as mere just fairy tales or fairy stories. That there's a strong connection with the archetypal resonance of the human psyche and the cultural zeitgeist that produces and manifests, changes, modifies, and even renames these phenomena. And therefore, the Banshee may be the good fairy. And if you think of it, the mean ban, white, the white fairy, the Luciferian fairy, the fairy of truth, the fairy of directness, the fairy of honesty. I'm not saying this is true. I'm saying, like, have you read like my book, the Druid Code? If you want to get a copy, I'll put the link down below. It's all about reading these stories in the archetypes and then applying it to the landscape. And that's what's important. So you think about that one. And, this is probably why I've had a fascination with Mothman ever since I read the John Keel book back in I don't know, as a kid back in the late 70s. It probably instantaneously resonated with me in terms of it was the Banshee of the Ohio Valley. Thank you. And also, the Mothman sightings appearing in Chicago now. Very interesting because not only did I notice that, but an article appeared on my social media last night that South Chicago was once filled with Indian mounds. I'll leave you with that.